Hey, welcome back. Let's talk about June. Actually, before we get into that, I think it's time for a Land Rover update. Well, there really isn't much to update. In fact, I haven't touched the Land Rover since I finished the engine. I'm itching to pull it apart. The next stage will be to refurbish the front and rear axles and the chassis. So everything else has to come off. And that's the reason nothing has moved. Right now, I simply don't have room to pull this apart anymore and still be able to function in my workshop. Now, I knew this was going to happen, and I have arranged something to solve that problem. On July 1st, I take over a storage unit, which is awesome because now all of this can come off, including some of the other machines and things I don't need in here, and I can take that all down to the lockup and have plenty of room to move on with this project. In saying that, it definitely hasn't been a month of nothing. I don't really want this to turn into the stuff I bought this month series, but that's kind of what this month was about. Anyway, all that to say, the major purchase of this month was completely unintended, but it's something I've been looking out for, and it was a really good price. But before we go outside and check that out, I want to show you something that was a hell of a lot cheaper, in fact, not very much money at all, but kind of hilarious. So let's quickly have a look at one of the most hilarious and I think pointless vice designs. This is a Yankee vice. That's not based on culture, that's what it's called. I believe these may have been made by Stanley, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Anyway, this was cheap and I bought it because it's kind of funny. As you can see, this is a fairly big vice and it's really heavy. The guy I bought it off said it weighs more than 18 kgs and I believe that. As you can see, it swivels. The jaws are 4 inches. Here's the lock for the swivel. If I put it right beside my actual 4-inch vice that I use, the record vice, you can see it's substantially heavier. In fact, it's almost a comically sized drill press vice. And that's what's kind of comical about it, because it literally is a comically sized drill press vice. Now, the idea of these is that you would mount this to your bench and it would be your bench vice. And then, let's say you've got a part clamped in here and you're thinking, I don't want to unclamp my part, I'd rather unclamp my vice. Well, you just reach in here with a screwdriver and then the top of the vice lifts off. So smoothly. There. And now you take this 18 kg lump over to the drill press. Now that we have the vice reconverted to a bench vice, you'd think, wow, that's fairly good. But when everything is locked down, there's still play in the mechanism. There has to be, because the mechanism slides against the base. And there is nothing worse than using a vice that jiggles around when you're trying to cut something with a hacksaw. So why did I buy this? Well, like I said, because it was cheap and it's awesome. And I fully intend to make a video about this vice. Restoration videos are a little bit thrashed at the moment, but something along those lines. Mostly I just want to pull it apart and put it back together on camera. So you'll probably see this in an upcoming video, and then I will use it with pride. Okay, but enough talk about hilarious vices. This vice dates back to 1915, by the way, so anyway, enough about the vice. Let's go outside and have a look at the major purchase. This is a G.H. Alexander pantograph machine. Model 3A, I think it's called. It's an English copy of a Deckel GK12. Presumably this is the 382nd machine made. These large pantograph machines are considered pretty much obsolete. The guy I bought it off was a retired mechanical engineer. He had inherited it from a tool and die maker who basically gave it to him, and then set it up but never really used it in the 7 years it filled up his garage. And I think that's pretty typical. Although these pantograph machines weren't exactly common, every single one that still exists is probably looking for a new home. And you should pick one up now as well, before A-Bomb makes a video about them and they quadruple in price. Anyway, this particular machine is capable of reducing from a ratio of 1 to 1.5 through to 1/10. The machine is obviously old, but everything works. It's in usable condition as is. The guy I bought it off inherited the machine as a 3-phase machine, and he obviously intended to use it more than he did because he splashed out on a brand new single-phase motor for it. Now, back to the name, G.H. Alexander. My understanding is that G.H. Alexander was a reseller, not a manufacturer. And pre-war they were the resellers for Deckel machines in England. A German-made machine was a pretty hard sell in England in 1945. So to get around this, Deckel and Alexander arranged to have the machines remade in the UK, and they were sold under Alexander's name. The machines are slightly different. I think function-wise and in terms of dimensions and how they operate, they are identical, but the castings are not literally the same. The only real difference is that the English machines were imperial and the Deckels, of course, were metric. Whether or not the English machines are as well made as the Deckels, I have no idea. One thing that interests me about this machine, I believe before me it's had 3 owners. Going backwards, the mechanical engineer I purchased it from, a tool and die maker who primarily used it for making dies, and before that, the Colonial Ammunition Company. That's where the serial number comes from. The Colonial Ammunition Company was New Zealand's only manufacturer of ammunition, and they date back to about the 1880s. They did supply ammunition to the wars that New Zealand campaigned in, including World War I and II. This machine dates back to the 1950s at the earliest, so it played no part in those campaigns. But the company is historically significant in New Zealand, so it's pretty cool to have one of the machines from the factory. Okay, let's head inside and look at some of the bits that came with the machine. And the machine came with quite a bit of stuff. None of which was advertised. It was just a very basic advertisement with a couple of photos of the machine. But anyway, while I was there picking it up, the guy ran around his garage and collected up all the pieces he had. And I think that pretty much everything that came with the machine new is still with it. And a bunch of other crap. Some hold downs. This style of cast hold down is actually pretty nice. Unfortunately, there's only 3 of them. A couple of wrenches, including a King Dick. Just some handles and things I took off the machine for transport. The all-important collets. These collets are specific to this machine. My understanding is that these are not the same as the Deckel collets, and therefore they are basically irreplaceable. So it's extremely good that they were included. And a box full of junk end mills. But within this there's quite a few ball end mills. See if I can dig one out. Of course, when I need one to show on camera, there's none. Oh, here's one. So I'll definitely sift through and pull all of those out. But I think most of the straight end mills are either smashed or blunt. Maybe not. I'll have a look through. I'll sort it out one day. This is the 3D tracing attachment. The machine is capable of copying 3D pieces as well as just two-dimensional. By that I mean not lifting the table up and down to cut lower or deeper, but actually tracing over a contour. And I believe this bar is used to set the level before you start. And I think this is called a cam tracing attachment. This bolts to the top of the machine, and this end piece would sit directly above the spindle. What you use this for is that, say you have a two-dimensional piece you're copying. Say you have a two-dimensional logo and you want to copy that onto something rounded like a pen. You make a piece. This block is custom made by the user. So you make a piece that sits in here that is the same shape as the part you want to engrave, and then the top of the spindle is spring-loaded, so it will follow that contour as you're engraving onto your part. And also insisted that I take the three-phase motor that originally came with the machine, which is good because I'll either put this back on and use the single-phase motor for something else, or leave the single-phase motor on it and use this three-phase motor for probably the lathe or something like that. So pretty cool. This is definitely a bonus. This is obviously a letter wheel. So you would simply spin this to the letter you want, trace it, move your part, and then move on to the next letter and trace that. What I find interesting about this is that the smallest inner ring only goes to G. Why? Note that the outer ring is the correct way round and the inner ring is mirrored. The machine itself doesn't mirror anything that you trace, but you would use mirrored text if you were making molds. And making molds for injection molding is one of the main uses for these machines. Of course, nobody's using pantograph machines to make injection molds anymore. And here is the actual letter plate. This whole plate bolts onto the tracing table, and these letters are all dovetailed and slide in like so. Now this is a mirrored set, so it's probably not much use to me, but definitely having the table, if this wasn't with the machine, you'd never find another one. So I'm pretty stoked about that. Like I said in the introduction that I haven't made yet, but you've probably seen by now, so I'm going to have to remember to say this. The pantograph is probably going to go into storage until I finish the Land Rover. I just don't have space in here to keep it. But it looks like a great machine, so it's probably going to be something that stays with me forever. And of course, in time, no doubt you guys will see many videos either about the pantograph machine or including the pantograph machine. Okay, so here we are at the shaper. So you might recognize this piece. This is from the knurling tool. I cut this recess on the shaper. And what I noticed when I did that was that this end, the end furthest away from the machine, was coming out thicker than this end. Not by much, but definitely a noticeable amount. So what causes that is that the table is not level with the machine, resulting in a thicker part here than here. So let me try and show you what I'm talking about with an indicator. So here you can see we've got an indicator. I've attached it to the head of the machine, or the RAM, and we're right at the back of the table, right on 0. Now watch what happens as we move forward. Okay, so now we're at the front, and you can see we've probably dropped down about 0.02 of an inch. But this is with 0 load on the table. Watch what happens when I put some force onto it. That's at least another 0.000 of an inch. So when the machine is running, we're probably looking at about 3/1000 of an inch drop along the length of the table, which is quite a lot actually. And so the table hangs off two slideways. The traverse here and the vertical slideway here. And you can see that basically the way it works is that the table is just this L-shaped lip, and then there's a piece of bar clamping it from the back. Hopefully there's some shims in here for adjustment, because it definitely doesn't look like there's any sort of adjustable gib. But we'll pull it all apart and have a look. It's not going to be possible to adjust the machine to get rid of the drop in the table, simply because there is no adjustment to compensate for drop in the table. So this is the back of the table. This surface here rides against the surfaces on the machine. Well, this is the bottom, this is the bottom. There's a gib here to clamp it in this direction, but in this direction there's simply this piece of stock which bolts directly here. And there's no gib on the inside of this. Yeah, so there's no adjustment. This is bolted on, and whatever the gap is in here is whatever you get. So if I measure this overhang, we get about 19.06 millimeters. And if we measure the rail itself, we get about 18.99 millimeters. So a difference of about 0.07 millimeters, or 70 microns, which is roughly just under 2/1000 of an inch. Now obviously this can't be exactly perfect, because there has to be some slot for movement, but 2/1000 of an inch is very sloppy. So it's a bit of a bummer that I can't just quickly adjust this. I'm probably going to end up remaking a piece that replaces this bar, so I can actually install an adjustable gib. I just want to show you something first. So I've got the indicator set up, so basically we are only measuring the play in this slideway. And you can see it really isn't that bad. I mean, maybe 1/1000 of an inch, and I'm tugging on it pretty hard. And now I've got the indicator set up somewhat precariously on the traverse slide measuring against the machine, so we're completely bypassing the table itself. And you can see the wobble is much more significant here. So that tells me that most of the slop is actually in the vertical slide, not the horizontal slide that actually holds the table. So the conclusion is that I'm going to have to remake a couple of parts so that I end up with adjustable gibs on the slides. Should be a pretty easy, fun little project. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to include it before the end of this month when you'll be watching this. I want an accurate machine. I want to be able to throw a part on here, machine it, and know that it's relatively square without having to faff about with shims and things. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm going to fix and hopefully end up with a better, more adjustable machine at the end of it. Okay, well I think that's about it for June. There is a YouTube video coming soon. I'm about halfway through making it. As I record this, it's the 25th. I don't think it will be finished before you see this. And on the 1st, I take over the lockup unit, so I'll be busy for a few days moving things down there, and I'll try and get some footage of that. Hopefully not footage of things falling off trailers, although that would be funny. Terrible, but funny. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching, thanks for the support, and I'll see you next time.